Hey everybody, Tim Anderson here, aka Renfell, and welcome to the latest video here on my YouTube channel. And today we're going to be talking about a classic MMORPG that many people have fond memories of. And I kind of want to look back at this game and say, was this game really as good as we remember it being? Or are we just wearing those rose-colored nostalgia glasses? And that game is Vanguard Saga of Heroes. We're going to be diving into that today in this video. Before we get going, though, as always, if this is your first time here, do me a favor. Go ahead and smash that like button if you like this video. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get updates for all the future content that I do. And of course, you can always drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think about this video and the topic that's being discussed. And of course, if you want to join our Discord, links are down there as well. And at the end of the video, we're going to talk about this, which is the Weave and the Void, which is the world that I'm creating with my brother and my wife. And if you want to support the channel, it's a great way to do that. You go over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/wandering hermits. Find more information about that. Without further ado, let's dive into today's video where we're going to be discussing Vanguard Saga of Heroes. And is this game, or was this game, really as good as we remember it being? Now, for my money's worth, yes. I have often told people that outside of the Lord of the Rings Online, and until that point, really, this was my favorite MMORPG after EverQuest 1 and EverQuest 2. I got the invite into the early Friends and Family Alpha about 18 months before the game launched, and it was only about 20 people that were logging in at that point in time, including the developers. There was, you know, 10 of us, 10, 15 of us, and then a few of the developers would log on and they would teleport us around and have us do specific things that they were testing. And it was just really cool. I mean, we were literally running around in zones that had nothing in them. It was just empty. And they would port us over to a place and say, let's test this mechanic out. Let's test this NPC. Let's test this. It was a really cool time, and it was the first time that I had been involved in an alpha at that early of a stage. This was also the only game that I have ever purchased a PC to play. This game, unfortunately, as good as it was, launched with some severe technical difficulties that made it very difficult to play for some people because the performance was just not there. It was not optimized well enough when it launched. There are reasons for that, I don't really feel the need to talk about that. Let's just say it was plagued with management issues and other problems that it was pushed out to launch 6 months before it should have been because money. Microsoft pulled the plug, and Sigil had to find additional funding, and so they went to Sony, and Sony said, "Well, we'll give it to you, but you got to get it out by here. Like, this is your cutoff point. You're not allowed. We can't give you a whole bunch of money to just keep doing this. You just got to get it out by this point." So it is what it is. And one of the reasons the game ultimately failed was because of that. But at the same time, if you had a good computer like I did at the time, I bought a supercomputer at the time to play this game to get past the performance issues, and it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. If you had a good computer. If you didn't have a good computer, it was not so great of an experience. But I do have very fond memories of this game, and there's a lot of stuff that went into this that for me made it one of my favorite MMORPGs of all time. So I want to talk a little bit about those things, because everybody always wants to talk about the negatives and, oh, Brad McQuaid's an asshole because he fired everybody. And yes, there were issues, but let's focus on what made this game so cool and why I do think it's as good as people remember it being. Because aside from those issues, it was a really good game. So first and foremost, I talked about this recently in my soundtrack episode. This game has my all-time favorite MMORPG soundtrack of all time, hands down. Period. End of story. Like, the music in this game was just amazing. It also had Keith Parkinson as the art director, and Keith Parkinson was an artist who did a lot of book covers and D&D stuff over the years, and his influence on the concept art and the overall game direction in terms of art really made this world feel like one of those epic fantasy worlds. This is also one of the last games to do this, but this was one of those games that launched with multiple races, all of which had their own starting areas. And this did spread the community out quite a bit. And ultimately, when Sony went in and did the revamp, they made the island experience. So they funneled everybody into this one starting area. But when the game launched, it had all of these amazing starting areas that were completely unique and designed around the races that lived there. I was a dwarf. This is where Thanon Rockguard was created, my dwarven tank, who then became the main tank and raid leader and everything for many, many years to come. He was created in the Vanguard Alpha, and I had the guild Stormhaven in the Vanguard Alpha and Beta, aka, that's where Stormhaven Studios came from. And then that became Haven once the game went live on the Florindel server, where we were basically the number one guild for several months until we hit the cap and we're like, oh, there's no more content in this game. Crap. Um, be that as it may. Soundtrack was amazing. The art direction was amazing. The world was massive. I mean, massive. Multiple continents, lots of stuff to do. And this was a group-based game, but it also had single-player content. So it took influences from EverQuest 2 and World of Warcraft, but the vanilla versions of both those games. So Vanguard was very much a game where you started off, and yes, there were solo quests that you could do to sort of level up your character, but everything eventually led to group-based quests and dungeons. And those dungeons were very complex, very difficult, and there was a lot going on. So one of the things I loved about the combat in this game was the reactives, because every class had these. And so there were certain things like if you were a warrior, and you blocked something, that would trigger a reactive, and then you would have multiple options that popped up about, well, what do you want to do? Which which action do you want to take next based on that reaction? And they had a limited time window, so you had to make a decision on, am I going to do a taunt? Am I going to do a shield block? Am I going to do a stun? Am I going to do an AoE? Like, what am I going to chain off of that reactive? Also, counterspelling, which no other game had done up until that point. I don't think any other game has done counterspelling since then either. But counterspelling was hugely important in this game because certain mobs would cast these devastating area of effect spells or one-shot spells, and if you had someone in your group who could counterspell that, you could block it. And that was an actual levelable a levelable ability, so your counterspelling would go up as you used it more. It was a really cool thing. And just all the classes were so unique. They had 15 classes, and to this day, I still think they had some of the best class design I've ever seen, with classes like the Blood Mage, the Disciple. The Druids were just amazing in this game. It's really good classes. Crafting system. Well, before I get to the crafting system, here's the other thing about the combat system. So there was this thing called sympathetics, which almost no one used except for the elite player base, because it was something that was very subtle. But it was basically, if you've ever played like EverQuest 2 and the heroic opportunities in that game, or Lord of the Rings Online and the fellowship maneuvers, very similar to those systems where it's basically multiple different classes having abilities that can be chained together to create these overarching effects that are affecting the mob that you're fighting. But you didn't have the big flashy UI elements that you have in EverQuest 2 or Lord of the Rings Online. Instead, it was just a very subtle thing where you'd get an icon over the mob, and if you knew that, then it would be like, and it was very specific conditions. It'd be like, if a blood mage did this, then the rogue or the ranger could do this, and that would chain the effect. And then if those two conditions were met, then if a mage or a priest did this, it would do this. And these sympathetic abilities, as they were called, the sympathetic system could create these chain of events that would affect the mob and put like debuffs on them, or big DDs or dots or other things. It was a really cool system. It was very subtle. Not a lot of people even knew about it. Not a lot of people used it, but it was a really cool way to sort of separate yourself from the rest of the player base by going, I know how to use that system. Crafting in this game was amazing. The best crafting system I've ever seen, and this was the crafting system that I was using as the basis for what I was developing for the Saga of Leukemia. Just really in depth. I mean, you can look up videos on it, but it was an incredibly complex crafting system, but you could make some really unique items and powerful items. And of course, we can't forget diplomacy, which was the third sphere of gameplay in this game. So most games only have adventuring and crafting. This game had adventuring, crafting, and diplomacy. Diplomacy was you could have it was these complex storylines and conversation wheels or conversation chains with NPCs, and it was done through a card game. And so you would go into a conversation with this NPC and you would learn things, you would learn about lore, you would learn about cities, you would learn all these stories about what was going on in the game. But to get the NPC to tell you those things, you had to compete against them in this card game. And each turn, you would learn a little bit more and you would get more dialogue and everything else. And if you would win, then you beat the encounter and you got experience, you got new cards, did other things, you got buffs. And here's the other cool thing you could actually trigger these citywide buffs that would affect everybody within that city. So you could give the entire population these really cool citywide buffs. And the cool thing was that these spheres were completely independent from each other, and you could level up within each one of those without having to do anything else. Like if you wanted to go do diplomacy, you never had to touch combat or crafting. You could just do diplomacy and just be a diplomat and play the game as a diplomat and role play and have conversations and never once attack a monster. It was really cool. And then eventually the rating of the game combined those three spheres together so that if you wanted the epic weapons of the game, you had to get all of those abilities, all three of those spheres leveled up simultaneously and they combined together. Really complex. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff went into this game, and even though it did have a failed launch, ultimately, and it eventually got shuttered. It was a very good game, and I do think that it's as good as people remember. And from what I know of what Pantheon is building, Pantheon is leaning more towards Vanguard than it is EverQuest 1. Brad having worked on both of those, obviously. Um, and I, for one, that's one of the reasons, I look at Pantheon and I say, if they can pull off a Pantheon style game, then I'm going to be really, I'll be into that big time, as opposed to EverQuest 1 remake, which I don't think they're doing. So it is what it is there. We'll see. We'll wait and see. But if you want to test and try out Vanguard, obviously it's no longer around, but there is an emulator, and I've got a link down below in the description text. You can go check it out. It's not very far along, and it's been in the works for like 10 years or whatever. It's all volunteers. They've done good work, but obviously it's a snail's pace because they're doing it in their spare time. We did it as a community about 3 years ago, and we got about 6 weeks of enjoyment out of it before we just ran out of content because they don't have everything back in the game. But they do have the earliest stages of the game across most of the spheres. So I would say if you want to try it out, you should check out the link below to find out the emulator, and you'll have to. There's some shenanigans involved to get the game since it's no longer available for sale. But if you want to go through those steps and try this game out, you should. If you would like me to cover this game and like do some more content around Vanguard, let me know in the comments below because I'm more than happy to jump in. And I'll tell you this, I might even be able to get convinced to maybe this summer do a Vanguard community um, guild. We might do that. We haven't done it in 3 or 4, maybe 4 years, 3 or 4 years. So I'd be interested to see the progress that they've made on the emulator since then. So I don't know. Check out the emulator. Let me know if you liked this video. What are your memories of Vanguard? And if you like this video, of course, don't forget, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, all those good things. Discord links are down below. And if you want to support the channel, which it would be really appreciative if you did, buy me a cup of coffee. You can go over to the Patreon page, patreon.com/wandering hermits. It's where we're building the world of the Weave and the Void. You can pick up a subscription for as little as $3 a month, which gets you access to all the book chapters as they're published with artwork from Christina, my wife. And you can also pre-order the point-and-click game that my brother's building, as well as the 5th edition source book and first campaign module, which are due out later this year. Plus, you get access to all the development posts that we publish 3 times a week and have been doing so since March of 2021. Thanks for your time, everybody, today. For those of you who are long-term community members, thank you for being here and supporting. And for the new folks who end up becoming subscribers, welcome. I'll see everybody in the next episode.